Hi, and welcome back to Criminology. We're looking at social structure theories. And what we need to consider here in Canada, it's known as a country with one of the best standards of living in the world in terms of advanced economy, universal health care, and publicly funded education. Excuse me. Now, this is all true. However, Canada is also a land of social inequality within the range of very poor to extremely well-off citizens. Like culture and social structure, social inequality affects our overall quality of life and is an important role in shaping who we are and who we will become. Being born in a very rich family, your experience and what you learn about where you live and what might be possible for you would be very different than the challenges you would face if you were born in a lower income family. You would likely face food insecurity, a question of assessing winter suitable clothing, or the probability of not being able to participate in some local community activities, all of which would be, no doubt, give a different view of what might be possible for you now and in the future. Now, this particular chapter on social structure lends itself to sociology. Remember, it was mentioned that criminology is a multidisciplinary science. And one of the disciplines that participates is sociology. So I'm going to give you a little background from sociology for some of the terms that we're going to be exploring here. Now, some of these terms will be throughout the chapter, but the first two we're going to look at will be social structure and social institutions. Now, not everybody quite understands what that is, and yet we live within these things all the time, and they direct a lot of what we do based on social structure and social institutions. So let's look at this. Social structures, they give us the ability to interpret the social situations that we encounter. So, for example, we expect our families to care for us, schools to educate us, and the police to protect us. When our circumstances change dramatically, most of us feel a bit of a sense of anxiety, to a lot of a sense of anxiety, because we don't know what's expected or what is expected of us. Social structure provides a framework within which we interact with others. Now, at the macro level, a macro level is the big picture view, as opposed to the micro level, which is looking at the face-to-face interactions that people have on a day-to-day basis. It's just between you and me, or you, me, and a few people. Macro is looking at the whole society, big picture view. So at the macro level, social structure is the stable pattern of social relationships that exist within a particular group or a particular society. So this social structure element can include social institutions, and we'll get to that definition, groups of people, different groups, statuses, roles, and norms. Now, those are other sociological terms, but we won't need them for this particular chapter. But it provides a map for our encounters. So how do we engage with an officer when we have been pulled over? How do we deal with a retail support person when we're buying a coffee? All of that is these sort of structures that we're talking about. But it's not limited, but it may also be limited by our options by creating boundaries. And sometimes social structures create boundaries that, you know, unless you're 18, you can't come here. Unless you have this competency, you can't come here. Unless you have this level of education, you can't get these jobs. So those boundaries that define which person is on the inside and which people are on the outside. It's at this macro level of all societies that certain basic activities routinely occur, and that are social institutions. Social institutions are the means by which some of these very basic needs are met. Social institutions are a set of organized beliefs and rules establish how a society is going to attempt to meet the basic social needs of everybody in that society. Now, social institutions are the means by which these basic needs are met. At the macro level of all societies, basic activities routinely occur. Children are born. Children are socialized by their family and friends and others. Goods and services are produced and distributed. Order is generally preserved, and a sense of purpose is maintained. Now, in the past, the needs have centered around 5 basic social institutions. The first and most primary social institution is our family. Every family is a social institution, and they have a responsibility to society, as does religion. Religion has a responsibility to the individual, but also to society, education, the economy, government, politics. So those are social institutions that we have typically identified. Today, more currently, we can add to this mass media, sports, science, medicine, and the military are also considered social institutions. So bringing it back to criminology, criminologists have long been interested in why certain neighborhoods and geographic locations are constantly and consistently much more prone to higher crime rates than others. As a result, there has been a concerted effort to better understand the dynamics of interactions between individuals and, importantly, potentially protective social services. Now, the protective social institutions, if you will, they would include family, school, and peer groups to better understand the criminal behavior and crime rates. Now, it's possible, and I hope you did, that you may have noticed that this chapter already is distancing ourselves from choice and traits, which were biological, into something a little bit more about the environment in which we live, which is more like nurture. And that's where the effect of the environment can impact criminal behavior. So like where you live and how much money you make, rather than just based on choice and traits theory, which are more biologically based, which you might argue can't be controlled without medication or treatment. So we're going to start by looking at the economic structure of crime. Now, economics is one of those social institutions. A couple of terms, though, that we should be aware of here, and we're going to look at them, is one is stratification and the other is social class. Social stratification. Now, this is the hierarchical arrangement of large social groups. And these large social groups that we're talking about are social class, lower class, upper middle class, upper class. And these are based on their control over basic resources. Now, this occurs in all societies, but not all in the same way. So for clarity, social classes or social class are segments of the population whose members are at a relatively similar economic level. And while in that economic level, they share attitudes, values, norms, and an identifiable lifestyle. Now that we introduced, the stratification. Now, social inequality. Now, this refers to the unequal or the unequal distribution of the resources, including wealth, prestige, and power that can affect our personal outcomes and such things in our way we achieve in education, occupational options, and our health. Now, this might lead us to wonder, how are social classes defined or divided? I don't know much how they determine that. Well, it's difficult to distinguish or to define clearly the different social classes, as they are hard to pin down. One means to organize social classes is by economists. Economists use what are known as quintiles. Now, quintiles are basically a method of dividing entire populations. So you can consider the population of Canada being at about 37 million, and economists would divide that population into 5 categories equally. So there'd be 20% in quintile 1, 20% in quintile 2, 3, 4, and 5. So 5 groups containing 20% of the population based on income and expenditures. Now you'll see beside me here, I've placed a graphic, a spreadsheet of expenditures by quintile group. Now on the far, I guess that would be your left, is the Canadian data from 2020, and on the far right is the provincial data, Ontario province data for 2019. They're there just to demonstrate that there are very big differences between classes, and that available resources that support one's family are greatly affected therefore. The general rule of thumb, wealth is health. You have money, you will be healthy. You have not got money, you run some health risks. Now it's interesting to note, when we think in terms of income and therefore where you stand in society, that it wasn't until 2018 that Canada adopted what we now know as an official poverty line. The phrase poverty line has been used for many and many years without a definition. You can't create a plan to reduce poverty when you don't know how to define poverty. So Canada now uses market basket measure, or the MBM, as a measurement tool to determine the poverty line. Now, how do you measure that? How does it work? The market basket measure measures on the basis of a specific, if you were to carry an imaginary basket that could carry a bunch of things in it. And in that basket of goods and services representing a modest, basic standard of living. So the basket contains food, shelter, home improvements, clothing, and transportation for a family of 4. All right? So the numbers in the spreadsheet there are all based on a family of 4 in Ontario and in Canada in the different quintiles. Then with the market basket measure, then Stats Canada determines the cost of these items in the basket in 50 different regions across Canada. All provinces are represented. So really, we don't have a poverty line, we have 50 poverty lines. In 2018, when they made that determination, 8.7% of Canadians lived below the poverty line. So 8.7, that's pretty close to 10. So 10% of 37 million is 3.7 million living below the poverty line. And 1.5 million, or 4.6%, of Canadians lived in what is known as deep income poverty. So criminologists then have considered what characteristics of lower class neighborhoods in which many of these individuals reside have often found to be the scene of inadequate health and inadequate housing, disrupting family lives, underemployment, translating into despair. So all of these factors have been linked to higher rates of criminal behavior and, disturbingly, are implicated in the culture of poverty that passes from one generation to the next generation. And in Canada, child poverty is the highest among the recent immigrants, especially among visible minorities and Indigenous population. Now, looking a little more at inequity in culture, when we consider lower class neighborhoods, we find inadequate housing and health care, disrupted family lives, underemployment, and despair. People living in lower class areas are prone to depression, less motivation to achieve, less inclined towards delayed gratification for future gain. I want it now. They cannot attain the goods and the services society links to one's self-worth via the conventional means. Therefore, they may result to illegal solutions to get those same goals. So next, let's explore the social structure theories. They are going to consider the impact of these various factors on criminal behavior and crime rates. The social structure theories view a disadvantaged in economic class position as the primary cause of crime. Now there are three branches. You can check that 6.2 figure in your text. I think I have it up here. So there are three branches of social structure theory, and each has its own strengths and deficiencies in explaining such issues as social disorganization theory, strain theory, and cultural deviance theory. And we're going to begin with the social disorganization theory. This theory links crime rates to neighborhoods, neighborhood ecological characteristics, focusing on the breakdown of institutions. So the institutions, remember, that could include family, schools, employment. So in the inner cities, the breaking down, or the focus is on breaking down of these institutions. So family breakups, lack of success in schools, not getting the kind of jobs that pay the kind of money. This all occurs in these inner cities, and it's a cause of crime in those circumstances. So indicators of social disorganization include high unemployment, school dropout rates are high, deteriorating housing, grouping people together with low income, and many single-parent households. You'll see that on figure 6.3. Now, next to me are some of the elements of social disorganization theory, things that make up the experience of social disorganization theory. Now, an important element developed by Shaw and McKay in the early 1920s is what's known as transitional neighborhoods. These researchers found that these neighborhoods with higher rates of turnover were less able to maintain connections and organization. So the more there was transitions occurring in a neighborhood, the less these neighborhoods had good connections and organization. Their work later was influenced by Park and Burgess and their concentric zone model. Now, I've put up a more current view of concentric zone. You'll find Burgess's Chicago zones in your textbook. The one I have added shows zone 1 and 2 are still the most crime-ridden, the inner city and surrounding area. The social ecology school of the 70s and the 80s were more critical of social disorganization theory, as it posited, at least more currently they were saying, it has much more, it posited more additional information regarding social ecology research. So we're going to start with the community disorganization component. Crime rates and the need for police services are linked to the deterioration of a community. Disorder, poverty, alienation, disassociation, fear of crime. This is true not only in urban areas, but also in the rural areas. And in these areas, you might find deserted buildings that are magnets for crime. Areas where houses or apartments are in disrepair are the highest risk for violence and gun crime. What link might there be between the poverty and unemployment? Well, poverty and broken homes are strongly related to neighborhood crime rates. Violent crime is associated with the percentage of neighborhoods living below the poverty line. A lack of a mortgage investment and unemployment rates and new immigrants all contribute to that link of poverty and crime. Community fear. Well, rowdy youths, trash, graffiti, abandoned storefronts, burned out front buildings, drunks in your neighborhood. Neighborhoods feel unsafe. And there's a perception that there is a higher chance of being a crime victim. Therefore, fear becomes very contagious in a neighborhood like this. It leads to more crime in many cases. So community change. Well, the rapid change that can be in racial and economic composition of an area, people coming and going of different economic and racial backgrounds, it creates that continued dynamic of changing composition in an area can lead to greater crime rates. As areas deteriorate, residents will flee to safer, more stable neighborhoods, but not everyone can leave. Risks of being a victim, culture can develop among neighborhood youth opposite to the conventional society. The term poverty concentration, and part of what this is about is working and middle class families will do what they can to flee the area and take financial and institutional resources with them. Those that cannot leave, the disadvantaged, are concentrated in poor urban ghettos, which lead to the concentration effect. Now, as working class and middle class leave the inner city areas, the most disadvantaged people are consolidated in urban areas. Isolation from social mainstream makes individuals more prone to criminal activity. Now, that's been a quick start. We just got our feet wet in this. We'll do more in part 2. And that completes part 1 of chapter 6. We're going to continue in part 2, and we'll explore collective efficacy, strain theory, cultural deviance theory, theory of differential opportunity, and then we'll wrap it up with what role they have played in social policy. And that's how we'll complete this particular chapter. So that's the end of part 1, and we'll see you in part 2. Bye now.